species groups for the East Asian-Australasian Flyway. So we're talking here, of course, about shorebirds, waterbirds, seabirds, landbirds and raptors. By way of context, again, as many of you would know, there are currently only 5 CMS parties in the Flyway, but both parties and non-parties and partners are able to participate actively through CMS initiatives and instruments and task forces like the Illegal Take Task Force that Ivan mentioned in his introductory remarks. And also just to acknowledge colleagues from the East Asian-Australasian Flyway Partnership, both Secretariat and partnership members. The EAAFP provides a highly valued framework for collaboration between state parties and other partners, between state partners and other partners, which is a topic that we'll come back to later in the presentation. Just to speak briefly to the methods that we propose to use in the to develop the situation analysis. We have commenced a literature review looking at both peer-reviewed and grey literature, also drawing on a range of data sources such as the IUCN Red List, the BirdLife Data Zone, and in due course databases managed by the Flyway Partnership and other partners, and also key legal and policy instruments both at the global and regional level and at the national level. Consultation is going to be a key part of the approach that we take. We're conscious that there is an enormous amount of knowledge on this call and more broadly in the region, and so there are several pathways that we intend to use to ensure that the situation analysis is informed by the experience and expertise in the region. This virtual forum is the first step in that, and there will be there is an opportunity, of course, as Sam has said, throughout this meeting to share comments in the chat or raise your hand at any time. But also later in the agenda, we'll be taking some time for discussion around key barriers to conservation and also regional perspectives on what's already working really well and what areas may require additional focus. We intend also to conduct a series of structured interviews with key informants from countries and from regional and partner organisations in July and August. And also, where necessary, we may reach out to some countries and partners with targeted data requests where that's needed to fill in key gaps in information. We'll then go through a synthesis and analysis phase to prepare an integrated assessment of species, sites, threats and policy frameworks, and the status and effectiveness of conservation actions of a variety of kinds. In terms of the outputs, the intention is to produce an accessible situation analysis report, something in the order of 30 to 50 pages, so that is something that is able to be and is more likely to be used by policymakers and partners. And the intention is to finalise this work and deliver it to the CMS Secretariat in late 2026. So we'll move now to a presentation of the preliminary findings, and Dr. Jenny Lau is going to lead the component of the presentation on species. And Jen, I'll just see if I can resolve this screen sharing issue so that you can speak to the slides.
Sure. Can other people see the slides at all?
Not yet. Just give me a sec. Is that working?
I can see it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, this is clear now.
That is quite a relief. Jen, over to you.
All right. Okay. Next slide. I'll just recover myself. All right. Okay. So as you're all aware, this is just a representation of the flyway showing the 22 countries, and that lovely blue line as an envelope showing the pathways that the migratory species that we all work on move through. But next slide. We all know it's a lot more complicated than that stylized diagram, and birds tend to migrate well outside that envelope. And this diagram is taken from the 2022 conservation status review that was of migratory waterbirds that was commissioned by the Flyways Partnership and Wetlands International, and this just illustrates just how complex migration is for these birds, and that's only the waterbirds. Okay, just a reminder of the CMS definition of migratory species. It's those where a significant proportion of members cyclically and predictably cross one or more national jurisdictional boundary. So that's not limited by migration distance. So a lot of these birds undertake very long migration paths all the way from East Asia down into Australasia. But then there are others that undertake more small-scale migrations, but do cross multiple country boundaries, and it's inclusive of altitudinal migrants. Okay, so the scope of the situation analysis, or our work in terms of species, is to be all CMS listed Appendix 1 and 2 migratory bird species in the flyway. Also relevant species containing resolution 14.20, so those that are being considered for listing that have an unfavourable conservation status, and EAAF Partnership Appendix III-listed waterbird species. Now, I just make a note that for the purposes of this presentation, I have put the currently listed Appendix 1 and 2 bird species and those on the Resolution 14.20 list together, just to call them CMS listed, just for ease of presentation. So the Appendix 3 for the partnership consists of 26 taxonomic groups of waterbirds. Next slide. And broadly speaking, there's 14 taxonomic groups of waterbirds. Don't worry about the detail, and 12 taxonomic groups of seabirds. Next slide. But in our preliminary analysis, we've actually created 3 groups that better reflect species ecology, particularly in relation to habitat. Now, this is, these groupings are used by a number of people within the Flyways Partnership. So waterbirds the shorebirds are being split out of the waterbirds, those 6 groups, because they, share similar habitat and undergo the very long migrations. And seabirds, we've put 4 groups of seabirds into the waterbird group because those particular groups of seabirds, they're not the truly pelagic species. They're the ones that share a lot of habitat with more coastal or inland waterbirds. So migratory shorebirds, we're talking about things like sandpipers, plovers and curlews. So wading birds that utilise a broad range of habitats, including intertidal mudflats, beaches, rocky shorelines, but also inland habitat as well, and dams and sewage farms, love them. They feed on invertebrates found in mud, rocks, sandy shorelines, and most of them undertake very long distance migrations via important staging sites in East and Southeast Asia. Migratory waterbirds, so ducks, geese, and large waders and small waders inhabit diverse water bodies, including wetlands, estuaries, and swamps. They have diverse diets and migration patterns, and that note again, this is there's 4 seabird groups that are included there. So gulls, terns, cormorants, and loons, and another group that share habitat with many coastal and inland waterbird species and face similar pressures. Migratory seabirds, albatrosses, giant petrels, shearwaters, and others primarily feed on fish, birds of the open oceans, a lot of them breed on islands, and have diverse migration patterns. So I'll just pause here, just, as Sam and, forward. Thanks, Peppy. I think as both Sam and Peppy have said, we acknowledge that a lot of this work is built on the work of the Flyways Partnership and BirdLife International. It's a very strong foundation for this study, but also acknowledge the important work of Flyway governments, the Secretariat, CMS Secretariat, individual scientists, and of course, all the conservation practitioners and volunteers who, you know, are out on the ground working to conserve our birds and actually contribute a lot of the data that we're using. Next. So in this preliminary stage, we've created these provisional species list. The migratory shorebirds and waterbirds is primarily come out of, my starting list was the 216 species considered in the report on the conservation status of migratory waterbirds from 2022. Next. And for seabirds, one of the core lists that I looked at was actually the old Partnership Seabird Group's 2014 priority list, but I aligned that with current CMS adopted taxonomy and brought in species from other sources. So that was a bit more of a juggle. Next. And for each of these species, we've collated information on their CMS status, whether they're currently listed or under consideration for listing, the current red list status and trend, took note of their migration status and what type of migration pattern they have. And there's then cross-referenced all this against information in data zone and various Flyways partnership studies. Now, these are provisional lists, so they'll be reviewed and refined during the consultation process. Next. So for migratory shorebirds, we've identified 60 migratory shorebird species, 56 are CMS listed. It's actually almost all of them. Yet next. 155 migratory waterbird species, 70 currently CMS listed, and you can see 7 listed under Appendix 1 just in and of themselves, 12 listed across on both Appendices 1 and 2, and 51 in Appendix 2, and 12 are under consideration for listing. Next. Seabirds, 112 migratory seabirds in the Flyway, 52 CMS listed, 5 under Appendix 1, 1 under both Appendices 1 and 2, and 30 under Appendix 2, and 16 under consideration. So if we then look at the red list status for across those 3 groups, where number of species on the vertical axis and their red list status on the horizontal, yellow is shorebirds, green is waterbirds, blue is seabirds. And you can see that there's a relatively low proportion of species that are critically endangered or endangered, quite a lot vulnerable, but a lot of least concerned species in those groups, apart from seabirds, where very few of them are of least concern. That's heavily weighted towards those already being recognised as vulnerable. Next. But those, you know, the threatened status kind of masks the fact that for each of those groups, almost the majority of them are recognised as being declining in terms of their population size. But they're not currently at the point where they're listed, but there are concerns about their declines. Next. Now, in terms of migratory landbirds and raptors, that's been a bit more challenging because the flyway concept is not as well developed or not as straightforward as migratory birds. Are you getting feedback, Peppy?
I did just then.
Yeah, I think I've got a connection challenge. Sorry. I don't know that there's much I can do.
Good. Could I please ask all participants to mute your microphone, because I think it may be a feedback issue. Because it's happening for me as well, not just for Jen.
I might have had an internet issue. Is that better?
No, it's actually because there's a participant who doesn't have their mic muted. If the meeting host could mute that microphone, that would be helpful. Thank you. There we go, Jen. Away you go.
Okay, thank you. Yes, well, the flyway concept is not as well developed for migratory landbirds and raptors in this flyway, because they migrate in many different directions, including very long distance migrations into other flyways, and very few landbird species migrate from East Asia into Australasia. Notable exceptions, the white-throated needletail and Pacific swift, some of my favourites. And we also recognise that the Flyways Partnership is considering its approach to these migratory birds. And at the recent MOP 12, the partnership made a decision to establish the ad hoc committee to review conservation issues of migratory landbirds and their habitats in East Asia and Australasia and options for addressing them. So that's very similar work to what we're doing. That statement excludes the word flyway, I think, because of the recognition of the challenges of thinking about migratory landbirds in the same way that we've thought about waterbirds for, 2 decades. And just like to make a clear statement that we'd like to work together with the ad hoc committee on this challenge. There's no point in duplicating our work. And I note that it's chaired by Dr. Simba Chan, and we really want to ensure alignment and complementarity in our efforts. So avoiding duplication and finding a way forward together. So given that challenge of, creating a list, my starting point was BirdLife International's list for the flyway, noting that it includes 41 countries, but is inclusive of the 22 countries in our study. And the other key source of in our species list was the 2021 review paper by Ding Li Yong and others on the state of migratory landbirds in the East Asian Flyway. And again, that paper, does speak of the challenge of defining the flyway for these birds. Okay. Okay, but having said that, most of the species that we've identified are either endemic to East Asia or are highly dependent on habitats in East Asia to complete their life cycle. So we have a reasonable degree of confidence that there's a core group there that we'll continue to work with. But there are species that migrate, still species there that migrate into Eurasia, Central Asia, Africa, or have circumpolar migration routes. And this, as I say, this data set will be refined during consultation. So we have 193 CMS listed migratory landbird species. One of those is on Appendix 1, 2 on Appendices 1 and 2, and 180 just under CMS Appendix 2, with 10 under consideration for listing under Resolution 14.20. And if we have a look at the red list status of these species, there's a relatively few are listed as critically endangered or endangered. The vast majority are recognised as least concerned, of least concern. But again, similar to what we saw with the waterbirds, there's a high proportion of them that are known to be or thought to be declining. Next. And for raptors, 43 CMS listed migratory raptors. None are just listed in and of themselves, and that's just a reflection of the fact that the raptor families are listed under Appendix 2 anyway. So 7 under Appendices 1 and 2, 35 under Appendix 2, and 1 under consideration for listing. Next. And a similar story to what we saw with the migratory landbirds, just probably a higher proportion of them are already recognised as threatened. Next. But again, quite a lot of birds are considered as declining. Next. Right, so that's so that's the work that we've done today on identifying flyway species. Any questions or comments?
There's nothing in the chat yet, Jen, but if people would like to pop their hand up and ask about any of the sort of information that Jen just presented then, the groupings, how do people feel about it, any concerns, please do raise your hand now or pop something in the chat and I can read it out. Okay, we've got some takers. Excellent. Taj, did you want to go first?
Yes, good morning everyone from the Netherlands. It's great to see this presentation and learn about the study. Just to check that the species listing also includes nocturnal species of owls and nightjars. Thank you.
I'll just address that for now. The list that like you've just seen the CMS listed stuff, but the only owl that's on the CMS list that comes in because it's being looked at under resolution 14.20 is the snowy owl. Otherwise, like our families are not listed under CMS, but I do have a bigger list. It's a very big list of migratory landbirds and raptors.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Richard, did you want to ask a question?
Hi, thanks very much. Great to see this project underway. Thank you so much. I wanted to ask, I guess, a slightly more conceptual question around the rationale for species that are included here. So thinking in particular about the landbirds and raptors and so on, what's the kind of, if you like, biological rationale for which species are kind of in and which are out? Do they need to migrate sort of anywhere? Does it need to be across country borders and so on? Sorry if I missed this in the presentation.
That's okay. Well, for CMS listing, they do need to predictably and periodically, cross country borders. Yes, Mark, I did. Sorry, I just saw that question pop up. But I think collectively, and this is not just on us as a team, we need to, for this group where there's been much less work done as under that flyway concept, we need some clear criteria for inclusion or exclusion. Otherwise, we'll end up with a lot of species that primarily migrate maybe to Africa or, across into Europe. And that might be where the primary threats actually occur. So yeah, there's work to be done to, develop the criteria for inclusion, I think.
And sorry if I could rudely just follow up. That sounds good. Thanks. And I guess if there are species that do migrate from East Asia, but outside the traditional boundaries of the flyway, one has to also consider, I think, where they would be captured, if not by this flyway mechanism.
Yes.
So I guess I encourage some thought around that to make sure they have a home somewhere, even if it's not with us.
Oh, for certain. I think I've said this to our team, if you gave this challenge to 5 different people at the moment, you get 5 different lists. So we need to, agree on the criteria for inclusion or exclusion. Yeah, thank you.
Great.
Okay.
Does anyone? Yeah, I think that's it. I think that's it in terms of hands up. And I don't have anything in the chat other than Mark has shared a question I think you answered about including resolution 14.19 from COP15. Oh, no, we've got one more from Lily.
Sorry, hi.
So,
if I think, yeah, again, like it looks like a really amazing start to the work. I was just curious on your comment, and I suspect it might just because you're not splitting below group. But I was interested in the move of the gulls and terns into the waterbirds, and I can kind of see it for gulls, but obviously for some terns, thinking about the habitat between terns and waterbirds seems like a bit of a stretch for me. So if you could maybe just talk a little bit more about that decision and kind of the trade-offs of leaving them in there and putting them with the seabirds. Thank you.
It's early days, and we need to take a closer look at that. I think, as I've said, the way that we group these birds has to make sense in terms of the habitats that they use and the pressures that they face. So, we will need to finesse that. A lot of terns, they do inhabit coastal habitat and face similar threats to, some of the shorebirds and some of the, the waders along shorelines. So, and they can have quite different pressures to the seabirds. So, it's not as neat as we might like. But I'd be interested in further thoughts on how we might look at that, because at the end of the day, we do need to group these, you know, species in a way that makes sense in terms of taking conservation action for them. So, yeah, I don't know if you wanted to say something about that now or.
Yep, thanks. I'll let you guys keep going now, but yeah, thanks for the answer.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lily, and please do share those thoughts with us after the meeting as well, if you want to have a bit more of a richer discussion about them. Great. Okay, so that's over to me. Not a lot to say on sites at this stage. If you just flick over to the next one, Pepe, I'm more going to talk about the approach, because we know that for, you know, within the flyway, even just for migratory waders, there's over 1,000 important sites. So if we include you know, a lot of the landbirds and seabirds, we're going to end up with a lot of sites. So at the moment, we're looking at how we rationalise the approach. At the moment, we're doing a gaps analysis, looking at protection levels across flyway network sites. When the list is finalised, we'll be looking at key biodiversity areas for each of those priority species, and looking at the sort of Ramsar and World Heritage sites that have been nominated for migratory species. So you know, we're looking in the order of at least sort of 500 sites at the moment, and doing an analysis which will overlay sort of the protected area database against areas that are conserved and that might not be. Early preliminary estimates are looking at, you know, sort of just at the waterbirds, we're looking at sort of 80 to 90% might be overlapped with Ramsar sites, but as we get into the landbirds and seabirds, we're expecting that will start to drop. And next slide, please. Another thing we're looking at is the amazing work that's been done with the Regional Flyway Initiative. So that's not looking at just number of birds, but sort of, you know, the proportion of sites which have a large proportion of those species. Obviously, that's only been done for 10 out of the 22 countries, but, you know, sort of really appreciating the approach that's been taken there. And again, analysis that's been done on that's looking at about 73% of those sites being protected or partially protected under domestic laws. So that's the sort of approach that we'd be considering at this stage. But look, until we sort of finalise that list of species, it's very early days, and really keen to hear what other people think in terms of the approach the Regional Flyway Initiative took, or what we've just outlined there. So really early days, and keen to hear what people think. And I'll take questions or comments on that so far. Maybe another second. Does anyone have any thoughts to share on? Yep. Oh, I've got someone. Excellent. Mark?
Hi, Sam. Great presentation so far. I just wanted to probably suggest you split those legally binding designations against those voluntary ones, just because they are very different obligations. I mean, I could drive a bulldozer through a flyway network site, no problem. But if
Absolutely.
I did that with a Ramsar site, it's, you know, there's legally binding obligations. So I think it's very important to split those, you know, designations out.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Jennifer.
Thank you, Sam. It's really interesting how you're laying the foundation for us. I'm just thinking about the sites approach. When we're looking at sites and, you know, our you know, extensive involvement in the Regional Flyway Initiative as well. And when we're talking about migratory birds too, about the connectivity between the sites. And although, and the connection, I think. And so I would like, you maybe going to talk about that later, but that connection for migration is really important. So even if you've got 500, if they're not necessarily connected, And I think, just I guess there are issues around driving bulldozers across flyway network sites, but in terms of Ramsdale, we do understand also that there is little that can be done in actually preventing that sort of thing, but I think it comes down to building those relationships at government level. And at this point, I would just really like to emphasize, I think, that the partnership is what makes a difference there, building relationships. Thanks.
Thanks, Jennifer. Viv, Richard, you're next. Sorry. Thank you.
Sorry, thanks. Just a couple of thoughts on sites. I think the sites as an approach depends on the degree of aggregation that a species has. So a species that aggregates a lot has a high dependence on a relatively small number of sites, and obviously vice versa. So I think that's an important piece to go in the mix. And I suppose on that same theme, when it comes to landbirds, raptors, seabirds, the whole concept of site sort of doesn't apply in the same way, especially for things like landbirds, which are pretty dispersed even while on migration. So I think we have to be careful not to be driven by a waterbird-centric history, I think, in putting this together, and maybe use sites judiciously where it's appropriate, and thinking about other ways of looking at it where species are much more dispersed. So more of I suppose, a comment really than a question. Thanks.
Yeah, look, it's a really important one as well, especially for migratory species, right? So like we might have all these sites, but actually it's the broader threats that that need addressing across the entire range and things like that. But I think it's going to be a mix. So we're just sort of, trying to have a look at it and having a look at saying, there are these many important sites. Are they all, majority legally protected? Yes, great. Which ones aren't? All right, let's do that. And then what do we need to do to address the threats to all of them? So, but yeah, the point is very well taken. Vivian, I've got you next.
Yes. Hi, thanks. Thanks for the interesting and good presentation. I have a simple question, maybe kind of related to what Richard mentioned. Is would there be any analysis by habitats? It can be a combination of different taxonomic, like the taxa of the birds plus sites. Like, for example, we are more focusing on our conservation efforts more on coastal region, but like inland wetlands, like grassland, forest birds, and like riverine species, there are not much focus or studies on that. So I'm just wondering if there could be analysis by habitats. Thanks.
We would love to do that. And I think if there is anybody who's thinking about it, let's talk about potentially a partnership, or if people have data on that we could work collaboratively on. We've definitely talked about it, but in terms of the, resources for the study, unless it's remote sensing and it's existing data, it's going to be a bit challenging. But I mean, that would be ideal. We would love to do it by habitat type, but we'd be looking to reach out, I think, to partners at this stage to be able to do something like that. So yeah, please, if anyone has an idea and existing databases, please reach out. Pepe, do you have anything to add to that? Because we've talked about that quite a bit.
Yeah, I think perhaps just to build on what Sam said, given a number of the really important points that have been made by Jennifer, Richard and Vivian around connectivity, around sites versus broader land and seascapes, and also the examination of habitat types. There are perhaps some challenges that we face in terms of the scope and resources available for the study, but to the extent that there's existing data, existing literature, or the opportunity to partner with colleagues in the region, including perhaps folks on this call, it would certainly add value to the situation analysis to be able to look to either broad trends or specific case studies in each of those areas around connectivity analysis, broader habitat needs and indeed trends in the extent and condition of those habitats. So we're just mindful of the constraints of the resources and time frame for the analysis, but very open to conversation and collaboration on those important points.
Thanks, Vivienne. Taj?
Thank you. It's good that I follow the three speakers who've just raised the sort of points I was going to raise as well. But one of the issues that we looked at, having done the situation analysis for the Central Asian Flyway, was that we're looking at habitats and landscapes for landbirds rather than wetlands and sites, as has already been mentioned. And we come back to the point that many of these are not necessarily KBAs because these are agricultural areas, for example, and landbirds are using agricultural areas in many countries along their flyway, and some species are quite sort of literally only limited to agricultural and nearby areas. And therefore, the concept of OECMs could be something to include and explore, because particularly given the Kunming-Montreal 30 by 30 that now includes OECMs, maybe that is an area to push more strongly on to ensure that the landscapes are being brought in, not just sites and areas of congregation. That's one point. And the second point is that the CMS listed species in the flyway that are really a small proportion of the total number of landbirds is also a reflection, perhaps in part, of the limited number of CMS parties and therefore the opportunities to have listed species in the past. I do note the resolution 1420 that calls on prioritization of species, but maybe that is an aspect that needs additional focus in order to make sure that more species are brought across the line for their conservation, recognizing their IUCN status. And again, the IUCN status for many landbirds shows us many declines, but maybe they have not been listed as threatened species. So these sort of processes need to be, let's say, sped up in this flyway for many species, because we've heard of the tremendous declines of many species that have not been listed because they are near threatened. But what is near threatened? It's near threatened because there's not enough information sometimes, because there's not enough research. So it's a sort of chain reaction we need to think through in order to protect these species. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I don't know if you saw there, but you got a big clap from Jenny on that one. Fabulous. Hey, Lyndall, how are you doing?
Hello, very nice to see some familiar faces. This is probably relevant to what we've touched on, and maybe it's too early to tell, but I'm wondering if you've thought about a framework to capture the currency of the data that actually underpins some of these listings. I really liked Rich's waterbird-centric history, but we happen to know, especially for under the KBA framework, a lot of that data is actually now quite out of date. So just wondering how you're going to capture that in this.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Jen, have you had to think about that, or no? Have you got any suggestions, Lyndall?
Not at this stage, unless you, as part, I doubt it would be within the scope of this situation analyses, but, you know, reaching out to countries to actually start to update some of the data that underpins a lot of these different frameworks.
It could very well be a recommendation. It's, you know, as Sam has said, it's, and Peppy, it's, you know, just how much we can actually encompass within this one study. But yeah, some clear recommendations around that. Yeah.
Did you have more to add to that, Pepe? You're off mute.
Oh, I was just going to say, I wonder if we might be able to provide a broad indication of the currency of the relevant data sets. I assume it would be impractical to then apply a weighting to that or in some way use that to drive the conclusions of the analysis, but at least to be able to provide an indication of how current these records or status assessments are across the region to inform a recommendation of the type that Jenny just described. And also, Taj, just wanted to respond briefly to your comment about the extensive nature of landbird habitats, and I think it is notable, as you mentioned. I think that in Jenny's part of the presentation, we saw that what appears to be a majority of assessed landbird species are in decline, and so I think it is important when we come to consideration of threats, which is the next part of our presentation, to understand what some of those key threats and underlying drivers are for the relevant species groups.
Thanks, Pepe. And Eduardo, great to see you.
Hi, Sam. Yeah, likewise. Yeah, nice to see you all. So greetings from Colorado. So I guess probably I'm just jumping the gun here a little bit because I think you just mentioned that next you're going to be presenting on threats. So I'll probably hold back then because that was going to be my question. Yeah, I'm always a little bit concerned when there is so much focus on sites and network and site networks, simply because that somehow dismisses some of the other approaches that are required for some of the other threats. That's all. So yeah.
Great. Well, you can be first in the queue after Sarah's presentation, which is coming up now.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pepe. Next slide, please. Yeah, I guess fundamentally to first point out that our approach with the threat review is we're certainly adopting the IUCN threat classification system for threat types. Our preliminary work has been looking at the publicly available scientific and non-scientific literature. I'll note that's in English, and also accessing databases such as the IUCN Red List and DataZone and having exploration around those. That will be setting a foundation for the consultation phase, which is the survey in which we have incorporated some questions relating to threats. So really keen to sort of add some additional perspectives and some regional perspectives to those. And those sorts of discussions will also be embedded within our interviews. And based on where we perceive we need additional information, we may well be making some additional data requests. When we get through to the analysis phase, what we certainly intend to do is to identify the key threats as well as their contributing factors. And these may also be known as indirect threats or pressures, drivers, opportunities, root causes. So really knowing those sort of cause and effect relationships so we can tease those out and identify key themes. Thanks, Pepe. What have we done to date? We've certainly undertaken a preliminary literature review, and we've embedded some questions within the survey. And noting the sort of scope with which we've undertaken that preliminary review, there are certainly some general patterns around what we were frequently seeing in the literature, and some of those were around the Asia and Yellow Sea regions being reasonably well represented. A focus on waterbirds and shorebirds appearing more frequently in the literature compared to landbirds, seabirds and raptors. But certainly the IUCN threat types, they were generally embedded within the literature, albeit with a varying level of detail at times, but that methodology was being followed. Just a bit of a snapshot here, just based on 22 papers that we had a bit of a deeper dive into and looked at some more detail. This is the frequency of threat type. It's not the severity, but just to give you a picture about the frequency by which threats were mentioned in the papers that we looked at, with the top couple there being around at various sort of levels of detail, the aquaculture and agriculture and biological resource use. And that certainly matches fairly closely with, if you have a look at some of the graphical outputs from DataZone, for example, in terms of species impacting, threats impacting threatened species. Thanks, Pepe. So what's next? Certainly we're open to exploring more literature, and really a call out to everyone here today. If there's some literature, some data sets that you think we may not have seen, please get in touch so that we can ensure that we have a good coverage in our review of threats. And really it will be taking a next look at really looking more closely at the literature in terms of those sort of cause and effect factors, but also looking at opportunities, gaps and responses. So what people are doing now and where people are sort of citing there's some gaps in our understanding of threats in the system. And then we'll be moving on to obviously embedding that throughout the next phases in terms of consultation and analysis, so that we're not sort of in isolation, that the threat species sites, we're embedding those within an integrated situation analysis. I think that's all. Yeah, thank you. If there's any questions or comments, and Eduardo, I think you might have been up there.
Eduardo, did you want to jump in with your question now, or is that did we answer it for you?
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess no, it's within the radar. I mean, it just pops up really clearly. Yeah, the issue with hunting is just that it's such a cryptic threat in the context of long distance migrants.
Yep. Thank you.
Richard?
Sorry, I'm monopolising things here from the questioning point of view.
No one else has their hand up.
I've done a bunch of work on threats over the years. It's exceptionally difficult to demonstrate that a threat is actually impacting a population. And I guess this review could be an opportunity to assess the strength of evidence. What I'm trying to get at is it's very easy to list out threats without any real basis for them, actually. And I don't mean to sound at all rude, but we've all done it. I've done it a lot. And I think it would be good to try to distinguish vote counting methods, vote counting, who's said what in relation to threats, and actually what the evidence base is around different threats. And that relates a bit to Eduardo's point that one of the problems here is that some of the threats that could be really important are really difficult to demonstrate, and we might have a very limited scientific basis for them. On the other hand, a hunch might be good enough, and maybe we need to act without good evidence. So I guess what I'm encouraging is to consider the strength of the evidence base around different threats, and also I think, as you've already hinted at, the kind of severity and urgency of those threats, and whether we need to act in the absence of information or whether we should be trying to collect more information about particular threats. Maybe there's a framework in there that could be thought about.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. And definitely I put some thought to that in the process. At this stage, it's pretty much been extracting some information, but that critical review of that information is certainly part of that, is looking at the evidence. And I think overlapping with that as well is, or an aspect of that, is the currency and coverage, and we're getting full representation. So there's some of those critical questions that will come up as we review the content. So it's not just an extraction and taking that, but applying a critical lens to that. So thank you for that comment.
Yeah, I think it's really important, Richard, because, so many of us have been in recovery teams or forums where you've gone, this is what everybody thinks is the biggest threat. And then you find out there's something no one is even thinking about that's actually smashing a population. So what we've sort of tried to do here is to look at as many different types of evidence as we can. So yes, we'll do the literature review, we'll do the survey, but then we want to have, you know, a rich conversation with people and saying, I might not have the evidence for this, but I'm a bit worried. And anecdotally, people are saying, you know, so we can just bring those different lines of information together, and it may be that that directs, you know, the gaps, that directs the studies that the recommendations point to. So but yeah, look, if you've got more ideas about how we can do that, or obviously we can probably find a lot of your papers, but any other sort of grey literature or things like that, or analysis that might not be as easy to find, then please send them our way. But that's something we've really been thinking about, because it's like availability bias, right? So Mark.
Thanks, Sam. And just building on that, I was just interested to know how you might deal with different spatial and temporal scales of threats. So there will be threats that operate at a flyway level, but there might be very narrow geographic threats that have a disproportionate impact on a particular species or species group. So I was interested to know how you might untangle that. And I was also interested to know, is this like threats currently, like now, or is it going to be a bit forward looking, particularly in light of climate change and, you know, marine heat waves and those sorts of things? So I was just trying to get a bit more of better understanding of this, like the spatial and temporal scale of this analysis.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And I think in part we're certainly keen to get with our other consultation processes and further, you know, information that we can hopefully receive, we will get a broader view of some of those spatial aspects. Let me just think, what was the other one? It was around the forward-looking. Yeah, especially in terms of climate change, we've incorporated one question within the survey that's specifically looking at climate change, the various sort of climate change factors that might be impacting species in the sort of jurisdiction of the person responding. But there's also the climate change interactions that we're keen to explore too. So some of those aspects would certainly be brought forward more to those more sort of detailed consultation processes rather than what we can glean from the literature as such. But I'll put it out to the rest of my team if there's anything they'd like to add to that.
I think I'll have to sit with that for a bit, Mark, to be honest. Yeah, I think, you know, it's early days, so, you know, having that thinking about, okay, there might be some really severe and current threats that are affecting, you know, a number of groups or a number of species in a place versus these, you know, more ubiquitous threats that are occurring and driving, you know, large numbers down. But yeah, that's a really good, yeah, I think I have to sit with that for a bit. Jen, Pepe?
I think more generally, Sam, just to make the observation that I think the recommendations that are being made and the questions that are being posed are enormously important. And I think it's perhaps incumbent on us to take the time to reflect on which of those questions might be able to be answered from existing analyses and literature, which might be able to be answered through new or novel analysis, recognizing that the resources and scope of work for this analysis are constrained. And then whether there's a third category where a significant additional body of work is required, and it may be appropriate to identify that as a recommendation of the analysis. And and cutting across that, of course, is the opportunity perhaps to collaborate with people in the region with expertise who have actually been doing a deep dive on these topics. And that, you know, it might be a recently completed PhD that we're unaware of, for example. And so there may be pieces of this analysis that actually require years of work. And so making sure that we're picking up on that to identify some of the existing and emerging research that can speak to some of these questions. I can imagine, for example, you could potentially do quite a complex empirically based analysis of key key sites under heavy impact that are acting as choke points and breaking up the connectivity that Jennifer mentioned earlier. Doing a deep dive into complex data of that kind over the course of the next few months with the resources available, I think is probably out of scope. So it would depend quite a bit on whether we can tap into existing bodies of work. I hope that doesn't sound as though we're avoiding the complex questions, but we just need to be mindful of how to ensure that the situation analysis represents the best available thinking and analysis within the resources and time available. Jen, I think perhaps you're going to come in.
I don't think I could improve on that. I think that's a very good summary. Thank you. Thanks, Pepper.
All right.
Great. Yeah. Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, we might hand back to you, Pepe.
Great. Thank you, Sam. And thank you to everybody who's contributed to the conversation already. It's a very stimulating discussion, and just encourage anyone who's on the call, please to feel free to raise your hand at any time or to put questions or comments in the chat if you feel more comfortable doing that. So I'm just going to touch now on the conservation action part of the analysis with a particular early focus on legal and policy frameworks. As Sam and others have mentioned, this is very early days. We wanted to have this conversation with you all very close to the start of the analysis process so that we can be guided by your insights and also to identify opportunities to answer some of these questions together. So for that reason, this portion of the analysis is at quite an early stage. So the intention for the overall structure of the situation analysis is to adopt a state pressure response framework similar to the approach used in the CMS State of the World's Migratory Species. So the conservation status of species and sites, the threats and underlying drivers, and then the broad range of conservation actions in response to those threats. At this stage, we're anticipating that the response chapter, the conservation action chapter, will assess status and effectiveness across 5 key areas: regional cooperation frameworks, national laws and policies, policy implementation and institutional capacity, site protection and management, and species recovery interventions. In each of these areas, we'll seek to draw on a range of information, the primary documents and instruments themselves, whether that be treaties, regional agreements, pieces of national legislation, national strategies, and so on, but also importantly, feedback from the practitioner community and policymaker community on the perceived effectiveness of those interventions. Where it is possible to link this analysis to empirical data around effectiveness, we're very keen to do that. And as we've mentioned a couple of times already, keen to work in partnership on that where relevant. So just in terms of sort of early stage progress, we've commenced a review of the relevant global and regional instruments, many of which this audience will already be very, very familiar with, and also relevant national legislation, although that component of the analysis is at a very early stage. So further analysis of national frameworks and effectiveness will follow, informed by consultation with policymakers and stakeholders in the region. As you might expect, this legal and policy analysis will cover 3 levels: global frameworks, regional and flyway level, and also national legislation across the 22 range states. Again, many of you would know this, I think, but within the East Asian-Australasian Flyway, of the 22 range states, only 5 are currently CMS parties. However, non-parties and parties participate in CMS-sponsored instruments and initiatives, including the Illegal Take Task Force that has been mentioned a couple of times already on this call. All 22 range states are parties to Ramsar and CBD, and 18 range states participate in the East Asian-Australasian Flyway Partnership, providing particularly broad coverage of the flyway. So the Convention on Migratory Species, of course, is the only global treaty dedicated to migratory species, and the current strategic plan places flyway conservation at the centre of the CMS avian conservation approach. There are currently 5 state parties within this flyway: Australia, Bangladesh, Mongolia, New Zealand, and the Philippines. Interestingly and importantly for the purposes of this analysis and the consultation discussions, the most recent CMS Conference of the Parties called on parties and non-parties to explore the feasibility of establishing a permanent flyway instrument for the flyway, potentially under CMS auspices. And it will be perhaps one of the topics to discuss in the targeted interviews, is to get an understanding on the variety of perspectives about the most appropriate and effective institutional arrangements for conservation collaboration in the flyway. In terms of other relevant international treaties, the other 2 that are most relevant, of course, are Ramsar and the CBD. We'll also pick up on CITES. There is universal membership across the 22 range states of Ramsar, and of course it's the primary international framework for wetland designation and management, with particular relevance to the intertidal and coastal habitats on which many migratory species in the flyway depend. The CBD, I think, interestingly, when we reflect on Jen's earlier presentation on species and the breakdown of species by conservation status, but also by trend in terms of the decline or stabilization of their populations, the GBF aims, amongst other things, to ensure that the extinction risk of all species is reduced tenfold, and that the abundance of native wild species is increased to healthy and resilient levels by 2050. So the high-level goals of the GBF don't necessarily direct action in this area, but they certainly provide a context for our thinking about the desired outcomes of our long-term conservation actions. And there may be some initiatives arising from the GBF, not least progress towards 30 by 30, which may have concrete and tangible benefits for migratory species between now and the end of the decade. Importantly, of course, bilateral migratory bird agreements are a significant feature in the region, with 6 bilateral agreements currently in force. They typically require protection of listed species, designation of protected areas, and cooperative research and monitoring. They are arguably the most legally specific instruments in the flyway, but their combined coverage leaves significant geographical gaps across the flyway, which is one of the key constraints. I wanted to speak to the East Asian-Australasian Flyway Partnership and acknowledge both the members and Secretariat who are here on the call with us today, and acknowledge also that many of you have direct and ongoing involvement in the partnership. So the Flyway Partnership is, of course, the primary regional cooperation mechanisms for migratory waterbirds and shorebirds in the Flyway, with broad coverage of countries, with 18 out of 22 range states participating and 24 non-government partners, some of whom are represented on the call today. Sam touched earlier on the importance of flyway network sites, of which there are more than 160. And also there's a well-established framework of working groups and task forces to support ongoing cooperation on technical and operational cooperation. The partnership combines long-standing implementation experience, well-established government relationships, and operational reach across the flyway, including in contexts where formal treaty engagement is limited. The Flyway Network Site System provides international recognition for sites of importance to migratory waterbirds, supporting government nomination, site manager cooperation, monitoring, and community engagement. Our preliminary view that we'd like to test through the consultation process is that the Convention on Migratory Species and the Flyway Partnership are complementary, in that the CMS provides a global treaty framework for cooperation, including across flyways through the Flyway Working Group and other mechanisms, and that the Flyway Partnership provides a highly valued framework for cooperation and implementation across the region, engaging both government and non-government partners. The 12th meeting of the parties of the Flyway Partnership established an ad hoc committee to review conservation issues of migratory landbirds and options for addressing them, with recommendations due at the 13th meeting of the parties. This raises interesting and potentially important questions about the scope of work of the Flyway partnership into the future, and we're certainly keen to ensure close coordination with the ad hoc committee, and also to understand the range of views on the current and future mandate of the Flyway partnership. I'll just touch briefly on the national laws and policies. As I mentioned, this is at a very early stage in the analysis. What we're seeking to do is to ensure that our analysis of national laws and policies is meaningfully and conceptually aligned with the rest of our conceptual model for the analysis, and particularly, of course, the relationship with threats and underlying drivers. So we have a provisional classification here that will be subject to refinement in the coming weeks, seeking to identify legal and policy and strategy frameworks relevant to 6 key topics: species protection and harvesting. Interestingly, of course, when we extend our scope of analysis to include seabirds, then bycatch comes into the frame. Habitat protection and ecological connectivity, and it would be interesting to think what connectivity looks like in a legal and policy context. I think we're still having issues with the presentation slides not coming through clearly, at least for some participants. I'm very sorry if that is the case for you. We'll certainly ensure that the slides are available to you shortly after the webinar. The third category is around development infrastructure and land use, including legal frameworks dealing with things like environmental impact assessment and energy development, pollution and toxic substances, invasive species, disease and wildlife health, which is particularly relevant, of course, in the context of concerns around avian influenza. And finally, climate change and adaptation, looking at relevant policy frameworks, including national adaptation plans. So this is at an early stage of development. The accessibility of national laws, policies and strategies is somewhat variable across range states. So wherever possible, we'll seek to do analysis in a way that analyses and aggregates information across the full flyway, but where necessary, we may need to bring this section to life with case studies. That is the case more generally with the entire conservation action component of the situation analysis. So in terms of next steps for this conservation action chapter or the response section of the analysis, we'll continue to review the relevant literature and legal and policy instruments for range states. The consultation survey will seek input from policymakers and stakeholders on the perceived effectiveness of legal, policy, institutional and programmatic frameworks. And we will explore, subject to the caveats that we've mentioned several times on this call, we will explore the potential for remote sensing and other empirical data to inform understanding of policy and programmatic outcomes across the flyway. And in addition to the survey, as we've mentioned, we'll seek input via consultation interviews to seek more granular and deliberative feedback. We've all mentioned the survey several times. Just in terms of the current status of that, we're just currently in the process of testing the survey and seeking feedback from some key stakeholders to ensure that it meets their needs, while also being not being unduly burdensome on respondents. So we hope to be able to share that survey with you all and other key stakeholders within the flyway within the next within the next week or so, I would say, as soon as possible, essentially. And thank you, Yunli, for your comment in the chat. You're right. I think that in abbreviating the resolution, that I perhaps omitted some of the important context that you've included there in your comment in the chat. So I appreciate that correction. Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments?
There's a couple of comments in the chat, Pepe, that I might just speak to. BB&J for seabirds, of course. Mark's put a question mark against that. Something we need to consider. And Taj has also mentioned regional mechanisms such as ASEAN. So something to think about there. I think we spoke about that with the Flyway partnership as well. Did you want to respond to anything there?
I might just comment briefly on BBNJ, or the High Seas Biodiversity Treaty. My recollection, and others may be closer to this process, my recollection is that seabird IBAs were one of the key data inputs during the EBSA process under the auspices of the Convention on Biological Diversity. So the EBSA process was ecologically or biologically significant marine areas. The process was principally focused on areas beyond national jurisdiction. So I think one of the interesting questions will be, how does the EBSA process and other sources of evidence flow through to the consideration of area-based management tools and marine protected areas under the High Seas Treaty as that treaty moves into implementation? I'd expect that those processes will be relatively slow, given the broad membership of that new treaty, but nonetheless, I think that's quite a reasonable question for us to be asking. Also, of course, there are existing management arrangements through the regional fisheries management organisations that overlap with those areas beyond national jurisdiction, and some of those, of course, deal with issues around bycatch and impacts on threatened bird species. So I think that's a helpful prompt and a timely reminder, Mark. Thank you. And Yunli, just to note, you're absolutely right on that comment, and I do apologise for abbreviating that in an incomplete way. Thank you.
Thanks. And we've got a little bit more in the chat about bycatch and the importance on many birds from Taj there, and the Convention on Albatross Petrels, ACAP, as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mentioned there. Okay, so we've got some hands up. Eduardo.
Thanks, Sam and Pepe. Yeah, just a couple of questions regarding the mapping exercise. I mean, for understanding governance and policy frameworks at various levels, and internationally, I would say that, yeah, definitely there are a few regional ones that it would be, that I'm wondering, I mean, whether there was a specific reason why they were not mentioned, or is it just a matter of the presentation? One of them is, for instance, the Arctic Council, and CAF is very, very relevant when it comes to Arctic breeding species, just as an example. So not in the interest of self-promotion, but in the interest of contributing to the conversation. That was one of the key chapters of my PhD, was actually the mapping of the international policy framework for shorebirds. And I'm happy to share it. Probably a little bit, you'll have to take it with a pinch of salt because things change quickly. So some of the instruments that I identified may not be relevant anymore, or may be inactive, but nevertheless, it was a very structured process to map that framework. And then at the domestic level, something that of course has come very clearly, had become very evident to me here living in the US West, is water policy. And a question that I have for you is, are you considering that as a separate theme when you are doing your mapping at the domestic level? Because here in the US West, for instance, now, big concerns with massive data centers being built in the West, and how water policy and water allocation policy plays out in issues over extraction, and how that's gonna, issues of water over extraction, how that's gonna basically put a lot of strain on natural ecosystems, many of which are wetlands, basically. And we are seeing it here with the case of Salt Lake in Utah, and the talks of building massive infrastructure for AI, big concern. So I'm just wondering, yeah, whether you have, I think it's worth considering potentially giving a specific attention to water policy, if that's possible. Yeah.
Yeah, I can certainly anticipate that there are a significant number of species within several of the species groups that are significantly affected, particularly by agricultural water extraction. And so just thinking through how we best approach that, I think certainly it needs to be identified within the threat framework and within the policy analysis. Understanding how we draw systematic insights into the nature of that threat and the adequacy of existing policy measures may be a complex one, but it's certainly one that I have in the back of my mind when it comes to policy frameworks, because large-scale water extraction, particularly for agriculture, has a significant bearing on, of course, on many migratory birds.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's all from me. So thank you.
And we're glad to have provided this opportunity for self-promotion, Eduardo. Thank you.
Of course,
Great.
no one's forgotten your important work.
No.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Is it Kai, Lou?
Yes. Hello. Can you hear
Hello.
me?
Yes,
Yes,
we
we
can.
can.
Thank you.
Good. I'm really glad to join this forum. It's very informative. Thank you. I just want to give a comments or information on national legal framework and policies. GF China program on Flyways supported one small project. Our team have done a research on review all wetland and migratory bird policy, mainly law, legislation and policy. So we collected nearly 100 laws in 20 more than 20 countries in the flyway, in this flyway. So we have the full text in English. Also, there's a Chinese version of a report on comparing the legislation system relevant to wetland and migratory birds in the flyway. It's already there, but it's only in Chinese. It compares with also the legal system in China relevant to wildlife conservation, wetland. And so in the future, we could share our output, and so we can talk about the details later.
Wonderful.
Yeah, on the other way is talking about synergy. I think we need more global and then regional and also site level. I agree with the bilateral ones, and that's actually sometimes even more powerful than MEA, and also than MEAs, and also than regional ones. For example, there are China-Australia migratory bird agreement, and the governments take it very seriously. I think compare with MEA and also EAAFP, they take it more serious. So there, I think we can dig up some information, useful information and practice from it. Well, that's just information share. Thank you.
Wonderful. That's enormously helpful, and we'd certainly gratefully receive any information that you're able to share on that analysis. Also, your mention of the Global Environment Facility reminded me that we just wanted to offer our congratulations to those involved in the successful GEF proposal for further work on flyways within further work in the flyway, the GEF project empowering conservation action in the East Asian-Australasian Flyway through a grant mechanism for civil society organisations is wonderful news, and just to congratulate both the countries and the partners, including the Flyway Partnership and BirdLife, on that successful bid. And we wish you all the best, and we'll certainly be looking at the project documents to understand the ways in which you've described the context for that work, and certainly open to further conversations about that if you feel that it should be featured in the analysis. Richard, welcome back to the conversation.
Thanks very much. It seems to me there's an opportunity with I guess, to link the actions to the threats section explicitly, because it seems to me that the whole arc of the process goes through working out what species are involved, where are they, and what's threatening them, and then I guess the action part. It would seem worthwhile to try to do a kind of gap analysis across the threats that have been identified in the threat section, and think about what sorts of actions might be relevant, which ones are present, which ones have strong mechanisms in place for delivering them, both internationally and also right through to on ground, and then where are the gaps. So I guess that's just a suggestion around trying to draw that thread.
Yeah, we've had an initial conversation around that, and I just want to acknowledge that the 6 provisional domains that I shared earlier are a bit of a mix of interventions and threats and management regimes and so on. And so one area that we've had a very initial conversation is how to actually ensure that the logic of the threat structure flows through into the action analysis exactly as you've described. Right. And if you have thoughts on how we might systematically do that, then we'd certainly be open to that conversation, and perhaps it might warrant a follow-up call if you have time for that.
Yeah, that sounds really great. And one other small point, we under the NEST project, Tatsuya Elise, who's on this call, and myself are leading a project to look at conservation actions across the flyway, in particular for migratory shorebirds, and trying to understand the evidence base supporting whether particular conservation actions are effective. So that's a systematic process that we've gone underway, albeit for a small subset of species. And there's the whole conservation evidence framework, which mostly has a European home at present, but I think potentially has real potential to be rolled out in this flyway, because we have very mature action and science capability right across the flyway. So maybe thinking about conservation evidence, what do we know? What do we know about actions that actually work, and which ones don't work?
Yeah. If you were open to it, I think we'd find it enormously helpful to understand your conceptual framework for that analysis and any preliminary findings. And it may well be that there are areas, particularly once we get to the conservation action part, there may be areas that can be brought to life with subsets of species groups or with case studies, and might expose the need for further research over time.
Sounds amazing. We're very happy to share all of that with you and have a call to talk it through. And Elise is collecting hundreds of case studies which could be used to illustrate different actions. Great.
Wonderful. You may be sick of hearing from us by the end of the year.
Sounds good.
Wonderful. I'm conscious that we're only 14 minutes from the end of the call, I think, and so I think perhaps we might move on. We have in mind.
Jennifer has one more question, Peppy. I'm not sure if you've seen that. I've got just one more.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Jennifer.
I shouldn't do that to the EAAFP, should you? Okay, I just want to emphasize really what Richard said, is that the amazing academic and scientific depth, I think, that has often maybe been unseen in our flyway globally. In my time here, I've seen that. I just to the point that I really want to make, a quick question, is that if we look who's on this webinar, it is people who have deep technical, academic, science knowledge. And so just maybe, I know we've had a brief talk about this, but cover your processes to engage, who the governments really in this.
As we've previously discussed, Jennifer, we'd certainly appreciate your support with that and are keen to collaborate with you to ensure that we achieve appropriate outreach to governments in the region. So it's a very helpful suggestion. Thank you very much. Tash.
Thanks. Just a quick point about, you mentioned this before about aligning with the ad hoc committee on landbirds under the EAAFP, and it would be good to understand what is actually being planned in the timeline for that, because I think there's a very good overlap between the two. And as Simba would have informed you, there was also the planning for a set of questionnaires to go out to government, to partner organizations in the next month. And so it would be important, I guess, to align these questionnaires so that we are not inundating people with different questionnaires with overlapping questions. So just your thoughts and to make sure that that happens. Thank you.
No,
and it's good that we've got these overlapping at around the same time. So I think building a strong synergy between these two processes is superbly important. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, I'd certainly defer to Flyway Partnership colleagues on the current status and detail. I understand that that Sam has had initial conversations about coordination, particularly with the outreach on landbirds. But I think we may have momentarily lost Sam. So just to note the comment, it's very helpful advice, and it's certainly something that we have in mind. We'll certainly seek to avoid duplication in the content of the two surveys. It may be difficult to avoid the practical reality that there will be two surveys out at similar times, but we're certainly looking to coordinate to ensure that there's no unnecessary duplication there. So your point is very well made. Thank you very much. So I'm conscious that in part, I think because we've had a rich conversation as we have moved through the webinar, we perhaps don't have as much time as we had previously intended for a more sort of open conversation on what's working well and what are the key challenges. But I perhaps might just flag these questions for you to make sure that we're picking up on anything that is very much front of mind for you that that we haven't yet had an opportunity to discuss. So I guess the broad question is that based on your knowledge or experience with migratory bird conservation in your country, your sub-region, or across the flyway as a whole, just an open question really, or open set of questions. What is working well? It seems to me that there's a great deal that is already working well, and we want to ensure that that's appropriately reflected in the analysis. What are the key challenges? Which institutions or combination of institutions may be best placed to address these challenges? What actions are most needed at the regional, national and site level? And what advice would you offer to the authors of the situation analysis? I just want to acknowledge how generous you have all been with your expertise and guidance already, but just wanted to put these questions on the table in case there are any further observations that you wanted to share that haven't come up already. And then we'll just move to a brief summary of next steps and hand to Ivan to close. We'll aim to have you all finished in time in 8 minutes' time. Hi, Kai Liu.
Thank you for giving me the chance. So for me, I would share my view is that try to strengthen a network of networks. As I mentioned, that sometimes the government might takes the lead role in conservation, but actually we have a East Asian-Australasian Flyway Partnership. If we could engage with individual governments or their bilateral or trilateral activities, it's really good. I think EAAFP got the impact in China. We're gonna host APEC meeting this year. So forestry department, they want to host a APEC forestry ministerial forum, and they want to make a video. And they just asked me to share some materials. Then they can use a bird, use the flyway as a clue, and to prepare the video. Means that all the ministers in the region, they will get some message from the flyway and from migratory bird. Once these people noticed about migratory bird, then it's easier to build a stronger network of networks. And thank you. That's my view.
Great. Thank you very much. That's very much appreciated. I'll just check to see if there's anybody else in the queue. And thank you, Tej, for your comment about the UNEP Regional Seeds Program. Thank you. I should say, by the way, of course, as you would have seen, the webinar is being recorded, and that will include, I hope, all of the content in the chat. So thank you for those who've shared written comments.
That's all we have in the queue, unless people are still thinking. Maybe it can be a take-home exercise, Pepe.
Sure. Let's move to next steps.
That might
Sam,
be me.
Yeah, that is you, yes.
Great. Well, I guess just a chance to thank everybody again for your really meaningful contributions today. It's already given us a whole heap. I've taken so many notes in terms of some of the challenges that we need to think about. In terms of next steps, though, we this obviously was sort of an engagement kickoff and to give you guys a bit of a behind the curtain look at what we're thinking. We will follow up with circulating the slides and potentially a recording. I think we've done a recording, so yeah, we'll share a recording of the webinar today. And as Pepe mentioned, the consultation is likely to come out within the next week. We're just finalising that now. That will be an online survey. That will be followed up with some structured interviews or semi-structured interviews. So that will give us an opportunity to do a bit of a deeper dive into each of these sort of questions that you've raised, or your sort of particular experience or expertise in different areas. And we may need to follow up with chasing you guys for some of the papers that you've talked about, or some of the data requests where we've got a little bit of a challenge accessing them. So in the meantime, my email address is up there, but you've also got the CMS Secretariat who kindly organised the meeting today, and I'm sure they can direct some traffic to me as well, or any of the team here. Just huge thanks again. It's a huge amount of time that you've contributed today, but I think it's it's a really important opportunity to get this situational analysis right, and for us all to sort of make sure we're rowing in the same direction for all these really important migratory birds that travel across the flyway and need the connection of everybody to work together. So I'll hand back to Ivan to wrap us up. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much, Samantha and Pepe and everybody in the team, Sarah and Jenny. And thank you so much to all the participants, especially after enduring a bit of a rough start with a change of platform for the meeting. I have to say just very quickly that I'm really pleased about the number of participants and also about the contributions, and the activity on the chat. That really means that we are doing something that calls the attention of many people. I think that we still need to do, of course, an effort to make sure that we reach as many people as possible, especially from other, especially other non-English speaking region. This is quite important for us, and we are aware of this limitation, and we hope that we can have your support to reach out to as many experts as possible. But from our side, just to say that the next steps are clear. The key point really is that whoever has got any information, whoever thinks that has got a particular piece of research contact, please reach out to me or Sam directly. The idea is that we get the most available information possible, and that we carry out the best possible analysis, because that's going to guide definitely the work of the Secretariat and the Convention, and we are really hoping that you can help us in this effort. So there will be, individual meetings and things to follow up, but also feel free to reach out if you want to have bilaterals with Samantha and the team on this. Any questions, you know where to find us in the Secretariat. I will just drop here my email just in case. And happy to organize any other follow-up meetings if you think this is useful. So nothing else from my side, unless there's any other final remarks from the participants. Thank you so much, and definitely we stay in touch.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. Good luck with this important study.
Thank you so much, Tash. We've got big shoes to fill.
Well, plenty of
you're
food
doing
for
a good
thought.
job.
Thank you very much.
Well, DSCs are still on hold.
The host may be able to remove Caesar from the call, I think, possibly. I'm not sure who the host is.
I think it might be Susan.
Okay.
We might have lost her.
We can. I think we can close it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks, team.
Well done behind the scenes, Tillman, with the creating the new thing. That was
Definitely.
amazing. I can't believe you guys did that. Pulled that off so quickly.
Sorry for the hiccups. Yeah, I mean,
no, not at all.
I chatted
was
with colleagues,
freaking
and
out.
it was seems very related to the account license. We were not aware. We're checking what happened, but yeah. Next time should run better. Okay, I'm going to leave this meeting and check the recording, and then we see. Okay.
Excellent. Thanks so much.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh,
Have a great day.
okay.
Thank you.